Hi, and welcome back to the shop. For the past year or so, I've been designing, developing, and building a letterpress from scratch. In this episode, I'm going to fix a bunch of small problems I've discovered over the past few months. These are things that have just kind of piled up. And frankly, if I don't work on this stuff now, I'm going to have a really hard time keeping up the pace of the project. Here's the first and probably biggest one. The misalignment of the two discs that crank the bed back and forth. These two discs are currently attached to the shaft only with a few set screws, and while this has worked at first, there's just too much force in the system. This, with time, has led to the two discs becoming misaligned, and when this happens, the whole mechanism grinds to a halt. So I'm going to do what I should have done originally, install a few keys. Oh no, not that kind of key, this kind of key. Cutting the keyway on the shaft is trivial. The slot though on the inside of a hole, that's harder. Luckily, they make a tool to do this, called a keyway brooch, and I'm going to test it out on this small gear. Side note, it's sort of amazing just how much a set screw can chew up the end of a shaft like this. This bushing goes behind the brooch to keep it in the right position. In order to start the brooch off, I've got to use my mill's quill. I don't really have anything else large enough. Once it will fit, I'll move it over to my arbor press. That's a much better tool for this job. I had to use some aluminum tube to give me more leverage. And look at that, a nice keyway. Let's cut the other part, the slot into the shaft. This is a much more straightforward operation that I can do on the mill. I got a specially sized end mill that's exactly the width of my key. Once installed back on the machine, you can see how the key keeps the two pieces of metal locked together. Okay, now that I've proven I can cut a keyway, let's do this for real. I'll disassemble the whole cranking part of the mechanism and get it onto the bench. One thing I want to point out, on the large gear side, the bolts that hold the shaft of the gear are in a really sorry state. They're all either stripped or their heads have broken off. So, to get it apart, I'm going to have to use some brute force. Though, apparently, it was never really in all that tight to begin with. Okay, here are all the victims. I've got to make sure that the keyways in these parts are aligned. So to do this, I'm going to cut them at the same time. This is definitely going to make this a bit more of a challenge, since I'll be going through almost 2 inches of steel. Again, I've got to start on the mill. This time, because the material is thicker, I've actually got to go even further with the mill before I can get the arbor press involved. Eventually though, after some struggling, I got it done. After pulling out the bushing, my 2 keyways were cut. For the shaft these 2 pieces mount on, I decided that I'd cut a keyway along the whole length. Doing this means that the keyway will be aligned on both sides, which ensures that my 2 cranks will be synchronized, if that makes sense. That's about it for this problem. A few weeks in, I can say this has been working out quite well. I should have just done this from the beginning. The next problem. This was my first attempt at a spring-loaded piston to keep the rollers against the frame. I've had a lot of problems with this. For one, the threads in these pieces have been resulting in quite a bit of friction and binding as the pistons move in and out. Also, I need a lot more spring force to get the rollers to reliably rotate. To fix this, I'm going to remake these pieces, this time out of some smooth steel rod and using some stiffer springs. I'll cut the rod into some short lengths with a hacksaw. I'll clean up the end of each rod on the lathe. Then I'll cut some threads. I was able to use the lathe tailstock to keep these relatively straight. Here's what the final piece looks like. I'll put the piece that engages with the roller on one end. And the other end engages with a nut. I can spin the end to change the spring tension. And now with these better springs, I get a ton more traction along the bed. It's still not perfect though. I think it's a spring tension problem. So I drastically increase the tension even more. And that helped a lot. Great! Now, I'm really itching to give this whole thing a try. But there's one more mechanism I need to address first, the impression depth mechanism. I was so proud of this thing the first time around, but it really ended up having quite a few problems. First, there's just a ton of play in the whole thing. From set screws slipping, to holes without bearings, to the lever having some poor tolerances. There's a lot to fix here. Second, I made these arms way too short. It turns out that these parts have a tendency to flip around in a way they weren't intended, and this results in the press binding up. Here's the plan. I'm going to add a spring to bias the lever in one direction. Hopefully this will keep the play to a minimum. I'm also going to remake the upper arm. I'm hoping that the upper arm being longer will fix the flipping around problem, in addition to also reducing the effect of any play on the bed. Making the lengthened arm is pretty straightforward. It's just a bit of milling, drilling, and tapping. The part. Let's get it on the machine. Let's see if it fixes the problem. Ah, well, now there's a different problem. It seems the set screw is slipping on the shaft. After some investigation, I've determined it's because this bit of threaded rod is hitting this C-shaped piece of metal. This C was a previous off-camera mitigation attempt for another problem, but it seems like I need to increase its height. Let's see what I can come up with here. I'm thinking that these two bits of steel will thread into a piece of threaded rod, and form a C-shape stiff enough to work here. Let's replace the original one and see how it goes. And it looks like it fixed the problem. Great! Okay, the time is here. Let's see how this thing works. Besides being fun, this is also an important diagnostic exercise to discover more problems with the system. So, as part of this, I had to acquire some letterpress ink. I found what looked like some surplus ink from someone's collection on eBay. It came in a pretty large can. Once I cracked it open, I sort of realized I had bought like a full can of ink. This is like a lifetime supply of this weird color. Oh well, I guess I won't feel bad about using it for my experiments. So I'll apply some to the ink disc of my press. I don't yet have my ink disc hooked up to rotate automatically, more on this later, so I'm spreading the ink out myself. I've gotten a number of comments about how I need to be using the correct packing on my press. Pressboard, tympan, and all that. That's definitely coming soon. Let's crank the thing and see what happens. I mean, not the best impression, but given I haven't done any packing, I'm good with it. It looks like the type is all inked evenly, and that's what's really important. Now, I'm going to see if I can ink up the whole disc by rotating it manually. Yep, that seems to work. Finally, let's see what cleaning the press looks like. My first try was a paper towel with some acetone on it. That wasn't anywhere near good enough though. So I scraped off a bunch of excess ink. I need to do some research into letterpress cleanup materials. If you have any insight, leave a comment below. Okay, one more project. I've had to put on and take off the rollers quite a few times now, and this is way more involved than it should be. It would be great if these circles were actually hooks, so that I could take the rollers off without having to unscrew them each time. But I'm sort of worried about screwing up my current set. So I've made some more to practice on. Let's bring one of these over to the mill and see how this goes. Huh, it looks promising. Let's get it on the press and see. Wow, it seems I've gotten lucky on the first try. I'm going to make another one for the other roller. And those are the hooks, complete. I've gotten quite a bit done in this episode, but I've still got a bit more to do. Keyways, roller spring tension, impression depth mechanism, and quick removing of rollers. Check. I've still got to hook up the ink disc rotating mechanism, add some springs under the platen to make the rocking mechanism work a bit more reliably, and trim the side plates. And then I've got to make a big flywheel and attach it to the press so it spins at a relatively constant pace. And at that point, I think I'm done. I know this episode wasn't really focused on anything in particular, but what did you think? I can do the rest of this sort of maintenance off camera and jump right to the flywheel next if that would be more interesting. Or continue through the list next time. Anyway, it's super exciting to be nearing the end of the Letterpress project. What's been your favorite part so far? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.